Coming up on the Threat Status Podcast, we talk to Lieutenant General Chris Mohan, Deputy Commanding General and Acting Commander of U.S. Army Materiel Command, about the 3D printing revolution that's changing the way the U.S. military can build and repair small drones, and how the Pentagon is rethinking how it moves equipment across the Pacific theater. And we break down the deployment of active duty U.S. Marines to Los Angeles, the possibility of Israeli strikes on Iran, and much more. Don't forget to go to WashingtonTimes.com and sign up for the daily Threat Status newsletter. Hello and welcome to the Threat Status Podcast. I'm your host, Ben Wolfgang, national security correspondent at the Washington Times, and I'm joined, as always, by my esteemed co-host, Guy Taylor, the national security editor here at the Times. I'm really excited about this episode because, for one, there's a ton of news to talk about, but also because we have Lieutenant General Chris Mohan, the acting commander of U.S. Army Materiel Command, coming up later on. So we'll get some firsthand insights into how the Army is changing the way it thinks about moving vehicles, manufacturing, ammunition, moving other materials all around the world in support of the U.S. military. But before we get to that, first things first, as always, Guy, what's on your radar right now?
Thanks, Ben. It's great to be here with you for another week. I'm tracking a few things in the moment to moment right now. The first being the surge in chatter across the U.S. national security community and the international media space that Israel is preparing to bomb Iranian nuclear sites potentially very soon. And how did we get to this sudden escalation again in the Mideast? There are a few key points right now, Ben. One is that the Trump administration's push to hold direct nuclear negotiations with Iran over the past few months has essentially stalled. Both sides are at an impasse because Iran wants a deal in which it can continue enriching uranium at some level, while Trump and his team are saying there's no way they'll ever agree to that. There's a kind of great narrative shaping going on here, Ben. Remember the core issue about Iran and nuclear enrichment. Tehran claims it has a nuclear enrichment program for medical research and electricity generation, but the U.S., the European Union, and a host of other nations have accused Iran of actually secretly enriching uranium for a nuclear weapons program in violation of UN Security Council resolutions. This all may sound like a broken record, Ben, but on June 12th, just as we were taping this episode, the International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA, which is the UN's top nuclear watchdog or inspector, formally announced that Iran is not following obligations it had agreed to with regard to its enrichment. So we're on the precipice here, probably over the coming weeks. Does Israel actually carry out airstrikes or not? But over the coming weeks, we'll probably have a UN Security Council meeting and a push by the Trump administration for the Security Council to say that Iran is in violation of world standards and must be punished or stopped. There's definitely a rabbit hole we could go down with all of that, Ben. I'm focused more on the question of, is Israel going to bomb Iranian nuclear sites? And if it does, will U.S. forces be involved in that action in some way? And this is a delicate question because as murmurings of an impending Israeli strike have risen over recent days, Iranian officials have begun issuing threats that they could essentially retaliate by targeting U.S. diplomatic and military posts around the Mideast. And those threats are what prompted the Trump administration on June 12 to announce that the U.S. was pulling all non-essential diplomatic and military personnel from the region. So the stakes are pretty high right now, Ben, and we're going to be tracking it in the Threat Status Daily Newsletter. One other thing on my radar, It did not get much media attention in the U.S. at all, but recent days saw China deploy two aircraft carriers deep into the Pacific Ocean for the first time ever. It's an action that essentially highlights Beijing's expansionist military goals in waters extending way out from the Chinese mainland, especially the South China Sea, but also potentially way beyond. Remember, Ben, that not many nations have aircraft carriers. I think there are about 15 nations and a total of about 50 aircraft carriers in the world. Nearly all of those countries that have them are U.S. allies. China is now shaking that reality on the world stage. The two aircraft carriers were spotted in the Western Pacific, with one of them sailing past the U.S. island of Guam, 2,800 miles from the Chinese coastline. Previous Chinese carrier deployments to the Western Pacific, Ben, kept their distance from Guam. Of course, Guam is a major U.S. military hub in the region. Interestingly, this all happened as Trump administration officials were holding talks with their Chinese counterparts in London. Trump's team claimed that the talks went well. These were the trade talks trying to de-escalate a potential trade war between the U.S. and China, and that a handshake agreement was reached in London in which China will loosen restrictions it had put on magnets and rare earth minerals that U.S. companies want shipped into the United States, while the U.S. side would agree to continue allowing Chinese students to attend U.S. universities.
Yeah, a lot of moving parts here, a lot of balls in the air, so to speak, with Trump administration foreign policy. Now, Guy, we talked at length last week about the Army recruiting numbers and why we've seen such a surge in recent months. And I mentioned Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth's concerted effort to eliminate woke policies and return to what he calls the warrior ethos of the military. Things like separating transgender troops from the force, establishing gender neutral fitness standards, many other steps. But here's one thing I didn't mention, and that's base renaming. Now, the Army had already changed the name of Fort Bragg in North Carolina back to Fort Bragg from Fort Liberty, the new name it adopted back in the summer of 2023. But now the Army is going a lot further, changing another 7 military bases, and they're doing it in that same creative fashion where they're using the original name of the base, but not the specific individual. For example, Fort Pickett in Virginia, the name of which had been changed to Fort Barfoot, was originally named, of course, for Confederate General George Pickett of Civil War fame or infamy. It will now honor First Lieutenant Vernon W. Pickett, a World War II soldier who destroyed Nazi positions with grenades in France. A kind of really interesting and poignant story behind Vernon Pickett. I'd encourage listeners to go check that out. So that's the playbook they're following under Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth. And I have to say, I kind of like it because when I was in Fayetteville, North Carolina 2 years ago for the official changing of the name from Fort Bragg to Fort Liberty, I didn't talk to one single person, including a lot of Black Americans, veterans who served at Fort Bragg, who liked the name change. Literally not one person that I spoke to, at least in that immediate area of Fayetteville. So here in this case, if you can retain the history but shed any actual links between the bases and the Confederacy, I think that's smart. We'll see if it stands the test of time over the next few years. But look, I mean, for Defense Secretary Hegseth, there are obviously more immediate and serious issues swirling around. And of course, we're talking about the deployment of National Guard troops, which started in Los Angeles after protests last weekend, which broke out when the Trump administration tried to carry out major immigration raids across the city. National Guard troops have been activated elsewhere across the country, including in Texas, in the days since then, since the Los Angeles incident. And we're expecting major demonstrations in Washington and all around the country this weekend for this major Army military parade marking its 250th anniversary, which of course coincides with President Trump's birthday on Saturday, June 14th. This is a big deal, Guy, but I do wonder in some sense if it was being a little bit blown out of proportion in the media. The National Guard helps pretty often when there are major protests or demonstrations, natural disasters, things like that. But of course, the more concerning thing to me is the deployment of 700 active duty U.S. Marines who are expected to be on the streets of Los Angeles later today, Thursday, as we record this, or sometime on Friday. By the time you all listen to this episode, they may already be there. Now, those 700 Marines will be on the streets of L.A., the military says, to support the roughly 4,000 National Guard troops already there in Southern California to protect federal property, protect federal agents, including those conducting the immigration raids. So is this legal? It kind of doesn't seem to be, at least to me, unless President Trump were to invoke the 1807 Insurrection Act, which so far he hasn't done. Now, what are they actually doing? If these active duty troops are just backing up National Guard forces, protecting federal buildings and potentially acting just as security or more muscle, if you will, for federal immigration agents, does that violate federal law? It's kind of an open question. At least so far, the Pentagon is really going out of its way to stress the fact that these troops, whether it's Guard or the active duty Marines, are not arresting American citizens on American soil. They're not detaining anybody, putting anybody in handcuffs, which obviously would be troubling for any number of reasons. But I'll just end with this. Secretary Hegseth made clear this week in testimony before Congress that he sees the events unfolding now in California as the start of a change in the military's role in protecting the homeland of the United States and securing the border. That means, according to Hegseth, going forward, the military can and will help the Trump administration execute its immigration policy, including these controversial raids in major cities across the country. This is a tough needle to thread, I think. And as friend of the show, Michael O'Hanlon of the Brookings Institution told me this week, the most immediate concern, of course, is that guns start going off and someone gets killed or wounded in one of these confrontations between protesters and American troops, because at that point, of course, we enter a very, very different place politically and socially here in the U.S. So let's hope it doesn't come to that.
Yeah, Ben, let's definitely hope it doesn't come to that. I'm going to get into this in my thread of the week a little later in the show.
And we are joined now by Lieutenant General Chris Mohan. He is the Deputy Commanding General and Acting Commander of U.S. Army Materiel Command and the Senior Commander of Redstone Arsenal in Alabama. General Mohan has served all over this country, all over the world. He's deployed multiple times in support of Operations Desert Shield, Desert Storm, Enduring Freedom, Iraqi Freedom, among many other missions. General, it's an honor to have you here in the Threat Status Podcast. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, hey, thanks so much for having me and giving me the opportunity to talk about what we do and then tell the Army story.
Of course. So right off the bat, rather than me explain it, I'd rather let you do this. For listeners who might not be familiar, what is it exactly that Army Materiel Command does?
So if you think about to correlate it to civilian life, so we are the blue collar workforce, predominant blue collar workforce for the U.S. Army, and in some cases for the Joint Force. So we run. We're about 150,000 strong. We run the Army's installations. We run a network of heavy industrial manufacturing facilities, our depots, our arsenals, where we fix tanks, where we make ammunition, and then we do the transportation piece of it to move it around the globe. And we also have a global network. Unlike the other Army major commands, we're a global command. And so we have a footprint in virtually any place there's a U.S. Army soldier. You're going to find predominantly civilian, a technician, a cook, a truck driver who is representing us, the Army Materiel Command.
Okay. Before we dive into some more specifics kind of around that, I wanted to ask you a big picture Army-related question about the service's modernization strategy. We've talked about before here in the show. The Army, of course, envisions transforming into a multi-domain force by 2035. And we could spend multiple podcasts talking, just about that strategy. But as a way of maybe helping listeners understand it better, from where you sit, what is AMC's role in that modernization strategy? How are you going to change over the next decade?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say that as we look at as we pull it apart and look at the segments. So first, we're deeply involved in changing the way that we do business down at the tactical level, and that is in a lot of cases the implementation of and the realities of data and the importance of data, artificial intelligence, et cetera. And it's anything from the way that we make transportation decisions to move ammunition around the world. We do that entirely different now than we did just a couple of years ago, using, again, artificial intelligence to help us make those decisions, or all the way down to how a soldier accounts for their equipment. We've gone away from paper, and we're rolling out a system that looks like an app on your government-issued phone, where you can take pictures, where you can scan and search. And that's all been enabled through the connecting things through the data layer, and then all the way from that point in our industrial facilities, changing the way that we build things, integration of advanced technology, so castings and forgings, advanced 3D manufacturing or advanced manufacturing, anywhere from, like, we have the world's largest 3D printer in AMC. We're 3D printing titanium in AMC every single day. And that's just one example of how we're in it. And then we bring the old and the new together. So we use advanced manufacturing techniques to improve our current manufacturing capability as well. And we see great value in that. And that's the direction we're headed.
We're excited to talk more about 3D printing here in just a second. But one more kind of big picture question before I bring Guy into the conversation. As I said, you deployed multiple times on multiple missions across the Middle East. And right now, the focus of the U.S. military, of course, is on China as the pacing challenge for the United States. So, when you step back and look at what AMC does, managing the Army's global supply chain, how different and perhaps more challenging is it to think about moving stuff across the Pacific versus moving stuff in and around a theater like the Middle East? Can you give our listeners some tangible examples of how you need to think differently for the Pacific theater as to how the U.S. has kind of thought for the past 20 years in the post 9/11 era?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and we think a lot about this, and we're doing some exercises to really drill down into this. I'm going to use the context of Europe. Because recently I served as a general officer, commanded the 21st Theater Sustainment Command in Europe, and we are very, very well versed with operations on the European continent. And we, as the Army and as sustainers, we love Europe. Big wide Autobahn. I can get on a plane from here, fly to Atlanta, 35-minute flight. 8 hours later, I'm in the continent in our forward headquarters in Europe. To go from here to where we have prepositioned stocks in Indo-PACOM, it is 17 hours with your butt in an airplane seat, right? So and that is not counting the time it takes to transition through multiple airports. It's 17 hours. And over in Europe, we have an alliance, which gives us freedom of maneuver to go from one country to another and cross borders with only a cursory check. And usually it's just because we need to get escorts for our convoys. Because we have that alliance structure. Customs is easier because we have an alliance, and in Indo-PACOM, it's bilateral relationships, and it's a maritime environment, and so we're having to rethink about where we put things from a prepositioned stocks, and then also how we move things, and then the authorities that we have with the different country partners that we have.
General Mohan, it's Guy Taylor. One of the reasons we wanted to have you on the podcast was because of your speech a couple of months ago at the AUSA Global Force Symposium in Huntsville. You sketched out a future in which, if a long-range artillery system were to break during a conflict, U.S. military personnel would be able to diagnose the problem through tele-maintenance and then potentially 3D print a replacement part, and then send a drone to pick up that part and deliver it to the front lines. This could dramatically cut through some of these spatial challenges that you just described. How close is that to becoming a reality? Do you actually have 3D printing capability and 3D printing technology at your fingertips now? And do you have forces that are trained on using it?
Yeah. And so the answer is yes and yes. Is it where we need it to be? No. But are we getting there? And let me just give you a couple of examples. So right now we are 3D printing category or Group 1 UAS, less than 23 pounds, at Rock Island Arsenal. So we are 3D printing those from a best of breed files that we have received from partners, from tactical units. We take it, we look at what they have, and then we make modifications to make it better, but also make it more manufacturable, if you will. We then use one of our other depots at Toby Hanna in Pennsylvania, and they do the integration of all the flight components. And then now they are working on, we are 3D printing microelectronics at Toby Hanna. And so very, very soon we will have that capability to manufacture the vast majority of the system in-house with government-owned tech data, if you will. But here's the secret sauce. We have spent hundreds of millions of dollars as the Army to field mobile machining and welding sets down at the brigade level, and they have some small 3D printers in those. Units are upscaling those to be more to add more capability because the technology is moving so fast. The drones that we're producing right now, the repair parts can be printed all the way forward at the tactical edge, and we've networked them together through a digital repository that where we hang the 3D print files. So we hang the file, and then we say, hey, here is what kind of printer this was printed on, and here's the capability that you need to have, and they can download those files, and if they crash the drone, which they will, they can replace control arms, they can replace propellers, or rotor blades, or the whole 9 yards. That's just one example of how we're moving it forward.
So I want to go into sort of the realm of the unknown as a longtime intelligence and national security writer and follower. I mean, does this introduce new risks? Could 3D printing systems be hacked or compromised in some way? Could the delivery drones be hacked? Is there a danger of unintended consequences where this makes things actually more complicated?
So I would say the answer is always yes from that standpoint. That's why we're so focused on being able to manufacture the entire thing. So I've got a team right now working on a proposal that is a UAS factory for the United States run by us, where we not only print and manufacture the bodies, which is relatively easy, but also the electronic components and then the motors. And so we're working to scale that capability because we believe that we need to have an organic manufacturing capability for the government. And then you can really, if you harness the power of the industrial base and our capabilities that we have, you think about the ability to 3D print energetics. And so the ability to take a drone body for a one-way attack drone, and the whole body itself is an explosive device. That technology is here. We don't have it yet, but we're talking to the people that have it because we have the ability we know how to build things. We know how to handle ammunition because, by the way, we handle all the U.S. Army's ammunition and a lot of the Joint Forces ammunition. And then we know how to store it, and we know how to, and we have training ranges and test facilities at the vast majority of our ammunition depots and arsenals. And so you can pull the whole thing together. And that's, like I said, that is one piece. At the same time, we've invested in the digital twins for several of our weapon systems: the H-64 Apache, the Black Hawk, the Bradley, the Hercules is being done now, and then the 113 personnel carrier, where a company, or actually an organization, is doing a digital twin for us, so that we have the digital files, so we can print anything that we need to print off to print at the point of need. And so we're investing in that technology as well.
This idea, you mentioned the 3D printing at the tactical level, and specifically around drones. I'm fascinated by this because when I was at Soft Week last month, I had several people, tell me that these small, relatively cheap drones are almost going to be looked at as ammunition in the future. So I just wonder, from where you sit, is that just going to kind of become an everyday sort of thing for a soldier, where it's like, okay, I've got X, Y, and Z, and part of that is I got this drone that I know how to fix, how to repair, how to use. We can even 3D print parts if we need to out here at the edge. Is that where we're going, or maybe we're already kind of there?
I think. Well, if you ask I think if you were talking to a general officer in the Ukrainian army, he'd say we're already there. And open source, they're probably going to print 4 million drones this year. And then if you look at the killing systems on the battlefield, drones have by tenfold replaced artillery as the primary killing system on the battlefield. And so so our drone sprint that we're doing right now is to give drones to our training centers so that they can train more soldiers what it's like to live in a UAS drone saturated battlefield where everything is under observation. And so we're scaling rapidly, but we got a long ways to go as an army.
On Ukraine, I'm glad you mentioned that. Can we circle back to telemaintenance for a second? Because I think that's been a little bit of an underreported key to Ukraine's success, over the past few years, is this telemaintenance. And look, the idea of, getting on the phone with a repair person to help you is obviously not new, but what is it about telemaintenance in the context of the Ukraine-Russia war that's been it seems almost transformational the way it's been used in that conflict?
backed into it by need. So when we first started donating weapon systems to the Ukrainians, it was just a property transition. Hey, this is the equipment that you're getting from the government of the United States, the people of the United States, sign for it. So we have auditability, et cetera, et cetera. And then because of that transaction that happened, and because of the ingenuity of the American soldier, a young warrant officer, she got the phone number of one of the liaison officers as they were doing their liaison duties. And then one of the gun batteries that we donated howitzers to called the liaison officer and said, hey, is there an American here that we can talk to about a maintenance issue? And that was the beginnings of telemaintenance. I went over there, I saw it, and along with several others, we doubled down on it and said, okay, let's give you more capability to do the commo. Let's give you interpreters so you can bridge that. Let's give you the tech manuals that and give the Ukrainians the tech manuals to get as much as we could. And then we started shipping repair parts. That turned into each weapon system had its own facility. There was a daily set for a chat all the way down to the tactical level. And once they built out their maintenance system, then it became at their depot system. We brought in technical experts, and then we networked in people from CONUS, the weapons engineers. It was a beautiful thing. But now it's even changed further than that, right? So now we're experimenting for us in the U.S. Army a AI-driven telemaintenance capability, because that previous one that we experimented with this out in Hawaii with at NTC, and units are doing it already. But the next iteration of this is going to be a chatbot-driven capability, and I've seen it with my own eyes. Radar repair, very very technical stuff. The operator types in the fault and says, "Hey, look, okay," and the machine says, "Go switch this circuit breaker. Tell me what happens. Reset this. Tell me what happens," and then takes them through that troubleshooting without having to expose themselves, because it's all contained on a laptop. It's relatively low bandwidth stuff. Now we're experimenting with like Google Glasses. I don't know what, it's glasses.
Virtual reality almost.
Yeah, virtual reality, where you can throw the tech manual up there. You can do all that stuff with the tech manual and your vision. And then if you still can't fix it, then being able to connect back to an engineer who is also wearing goggles. We're experimenting with that right now.
So we're touching on a lot of cutting edge tech here, and it sounds a bit futuristic, but in the spirit of it, let's go even further. How does artificial intelligence fit into all of this?
It helps us make decisions faster from a distribution standpoint, but from a maintenance standpoint, it learns. It ingests massive amounts of data.
So you're already using it from your position near the very top of Army Materiel Command.
Absolutely. We use artificial intelligence on some of our systems just so we can see every single day. Every single day, we have a system we call Weapon System 360 that can take the current maintenance data for like our tank fleet, right? Real live data. And then start drilling down on the repair parts that are causing our fleet to have readiness challenges. And then it can drill down not only the parts, but then it gives you a map of where the replacement parts are if they're not on your installation. And then if they're back ordered, it will tell you the name of the company to the name of the CEO of that company who is responsible for those back orders. I used to get a product every Friday called the Fleet of the Week. And we would take and dissect one of our combat fleets every week. And there was a team of folks that did that would look for vulnerabilities in the supply chain, try to solve problems. Hey, we can do that Fleet of the Week every 30 seconds now, if that's what we want to do. And that has manifested itself in the last 6 months. That's how fast the space is working. Every time I see Weapon System 360, and we have data scientists too. So we're not just truck drivers. We have data scientists. They say, hey, check this out. We added a new functionality to it, and it's something new. And you go, damn, why didn't I think about that? It's the space is moving so fast.
Lieutenant General Mohan, thank you so much for joining us here. Really enjoyed it.
All right, thanks.
And it's time now for Threat of the Week, our weekly segment here in the show where Guy and I each identify a threat, whether it's here at home domestically in the U.S. or in some corner of the world that we think is impacting U.S. national security right now. This week, as you listen to the show. And Guy, my threat of the week is that the U.S. is going to potentially fall behind China in shipbuilding, and that could put us at a big disadvantage in the Pacific because, as General Mohan just talked about, there's obviously a lot of water in that theater, and that changes the way you need to think about moving material and people around. China already, as we talked about before in the show, has a bigger Navy by the numbers than the U.S. does. And by some estimates, China is now producing more than half of all of the world's commercial ships. So how does the U.S. stack up? Not well. Navy Secretary John Phelan this week told the House Armed Services Committee that Pentagon-funded shipbuilding programs are, quote, a mess, unquote, with even the best programs running way behind schedule and 50% in some cases over budget. The White House, of course, knows this is a problem. In his address to Congress in March, President Trump announced the formation of a White House Office of Shipbuilding that he said would provide special tax incentives to bring shipbuilding back to the United States. 3 months later, at least according to Secretary Phelan, apparently not a lot of progress has been made in the short term. In fact, he reiterated the Navy is exploring whether foreign shipyards can fill the gap. And we've highlighted that in the Threat Status newsletter, even just this week, that the Trump administration is considering whether to partner with allies such as Japan for support. And the Japanese government has even proposed setting up a joint fund to help revitalize U.S. shipbuilding. So there are some ideas to turn this around, but right now, it's one of those situations where it seems like everybody, all of the stakeholders know and admit there's a huge problem, but it's a really hard and complicated one to try to fix. And that's why it's my threat of the week.
It's totally interesting, Ben. I actually had a whole discussion about this issue of China outpacing the United States in shipbuilding and other areas in a Threat Status Influencers video a year ago with Seth Jones from the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Listeners can find that video interview by just Googling Threat Status, how China is outpacing the U.S. in defense industrial production. My threat of the week, Ben, is that while President Trump's illegal immigration policy may remain popular with many Americans, the manner in which the crackdown is playing out and how it has been explained by the administration is threatening to result in an escalating clash between authorities, the U.S. military, and violent protesters throughout the summer of 2025, and that the situation in Los Angeles is only a small first chapter of chaos that could be about to unfold for months to come.
Yeah, this, to say that we're kind of at a pivotal moment here on that front would be a bit of an understatement. We'll certainly be watching developments here at Threat Status. Thank you for that, Guy. A huge thanks to Lieutenant General Mohan from Army Materiel Command for a fascinating sort of look behind the curtain of what the Army is doing with 3D printing and moving its material around the world. A big thanks to all of you, of course, our listeners. Please go ahead, share the podcast with all of your friends, hit that subscribe button. Guy and I will be back next week on the Threat Status Podcast.